I spent 7 years carrying the weight of my family on my back, quietly paying off their debts while they treated me like an unwanted ghost at their feast. My name is Julianne, and if you have ever been made to feel invisible by the very people who were supposed to love you, you are going to want to sit down for this. Before we dive into how I finally turned the tables, let me ask, where in the world are you watching this from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love reading where everyone is tuning in from. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on the bell notifications so you never miss another story of absolute icy redemption. It all culminated on a rainy Tuesday evening at L'Auberge d'Or, an outrageously upscale steakhouse downtown where the air smelled of truffles, aged oak, and unearned privilege. The occasion was supposed to be a celebration for my younger sister, Evelyn. She had just landed a mid-level marketing role after months of doing absolutely nothing, and my father had insistently summoned the entire family to toast her grand achievement. I arrived right on time, holding the hand of my 8-year-old son, Leo. Leo is a quiet, brilliant boy who lives on the autism spectrum. Loud environments and sudden changes easily overwhelm him, so I had spent the entire afternoon preparing him for this dinner, promising him that his grandfather and aunt were excited to see him. I had dressed him in his smartest little navy blazer, and his eyes held a bright, hopeful shine as we were led to the private dining alcove at the back of the restaurant. When we sat down, the dynamic was instantly familiar. My father sat at the head of the long oak table, beaming at Evelyn and her husband, Richard. Evelyn's 2 children, 12-year-old twin boys who had been raised to view me as a glorified servant, were already aggressively tapping on their tablets, ignoring everyone around them. The waiter, an impeccably dressed man holding heavy leather-bound menus, stepped forward to take our orders. My father waved his hand grandly, declaring that tonight cost was no object. Evelyn immediately ordered 2 32-ounce dry-aged Tomahawk ribeyes for her sons, complete with side dishes of black truffle mac and cheese, glazed heirloom carrots, and fully loaded baked potatoes. Each of those steaks carried a hefty price tag of $120. Evelyn and Richard ordered rich prime ribs, expensive wine, and a round of preliminary seafood towers. When the waiter turned to me, I opened my mouth to speak, but Evelyn abruptly cut in, holding up a manicured hand. "Oh, don't bother giving him a menu," Evelyn said, tossing her hair back and laughing lightly as if she were sharing a light-hearted joke with the server. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a stale, pre-packaged grocery store dinner roll wrapped in plastic, and tossed it across the white tablecloth. It landed with a soft thud right next to Leo's water glass. "We didn't get anything for your son. Honestly, Julianne, with his special little condition, real food is just a waste anyway. He won't even appreciate it. He can just eat this bread." The dining room went completely silent in my mind, though the background hum of jazz music kept playing. I looked down at the plastic-wrapped roll, then up at Evelyn. She was smirking, taking a slow sip of her Prosecco. Her husband chuckled under his breath, and her sons didn't even look up from their screens. I turned to my father, expecting him to step in, to scold her, or at least to show a shred of basic human decency toward his only grandson. Instead, my father adjusted his gold watch, frowned at me with deep annoyance, and shook his head. "Your sister is right, Julianne," my father said coldly, leaning forward. "You know how particular Leo is. You should have brought food for him from home if you wanted him to eat a full meal. Don't ruin your sister's special night with your drama." Leo looked down at the stale piece of bread, his little fingers nervously clutching the hem of his navy jacket. He looked up at me with big, confused eyes, silently asking why his cousins were getting massive plates of delicious food while he was given trash. A familiar heat flared in my chest, the same burn I had swallowed for years while paying off my father's predatory loans, funding Evelyn's college tuition, and keeping their lights on while they treated me like a second-class citizen because I was a single mother working 2 jobs. But in that exact second, something fundamental inside me snapped. The decades of conditioning, the guilt, the desperate urge to seek their approval, it all evaporated into thin air. I looked at my father, then at Evelyn. I squeezed Leo's hand under the table, feeling a calm, crystal-clear wave of certainty wash over me. I smiled, perfectly serene, and said, "Understood." Evelyn smirked, satisfied that she had put me in my place yet again. My father nodded approvingly, turning back to boast about Evelyn's new job to the rest of the table. For the next hour, I sat silently as the appetizers and main courses arrived. Evelyn's kids gorged themselves on $120 steaks, smearing sauce across their faces while leaving half of it wasted on their plates. Evelyn and my father clinked their glasses of high-end Cabernet, entirely indifferent to Leo, who sat quietly beside me, sipping his tap water. I didn't utter a single complaint. I simply waited. I waited while they ordered 3 different chocolate lava cakes and artisanal ice creams for dessert. I waited until the plates were cleared, the wine bottles were empty, and the family sat back in their chairs, full, bloated, and smug. Finally, the waiter returned to the table, placing a heavy silver tray in the center. Resting on it was the itemized bill, totaling well over $1,200 before tip. My father didn't even glance at it. Instead, he slid the silver tray across the table directly toward me, exactly as he had done at every single family dinner for the last 7 years. "All right, Julianne," my father said casually, picking up a toothpick. "Take care of the check so we can get out of here. Make sure you leave a good tip." Evelyn giggled, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin. "Thanks, sis. You're the best." I slowly let go of Leo's hand. I picked up the leather bill booklet, opened it, and reviewed the charges. Then, as the waiter stood attentively nearby, waiting for my credit card, I placed the bill back down, stood up, and cleared my throat loudly. The entire table looked up at me in surprise. I didn't look angry. I was radiant. I smiled broadly, looked directly at the waiter, and announced so every table around us could hear. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice carrying cleanly across the silent dining room. "I'd like to split this bill, please." My son and I had 2 glasses of tap water. Everything else on this table, the $240 in prime steaks for children who smashed them into paste, the $400 bottle of wine, and the 3 chocolate desserts, belongs entirely to these 4 adults. The air at the table instantly turned to ice. Evelyn's smile froze mid-cheek, her fork hovering in midair over a scrap of remaining cake. My father's jaw dropped so hard his toothpick fell onto his lap. "Julianne, what the hell are you doing?" My father hissed under his breath, leaning across the white tablecloth, his face turning a mottled red. "Sit down right now. You're making a scene." "I'm not making a scene at all, Dad," I replied, my voice smooth, even, and deliberate. "As you so kindly pointed out an hour ago, Leo and I were not included in this meal. You told me it was my responsibility to cater to my son, and Evelyn reminded me that spending money on him is a waste. So, following your exact advice, I am only paying for what we consumed, which is $0.00. The waiter hesitated, sensing the sudden electric tension, but I pulled a crisp $20 bill from my purse and handed it directly to him. "This is for your service, since you've been wonderful. The main check goes to the gentleman at the head of the table. He was the one who grandly announced that cost was no object tonight." "Julianne, stop this ridiculous game!" Evelyn spat, her voice dropping into an angry, embarrassed strain as nearby diners turned to stare. "We don't have the money for a $1,200 dinner. You know Richard just took a pay cut and my new job doesn't pay out for a month. Then perhaps you shouldn't have ordered 32-ounce dry-aged steaks for 12-year-olds? I said with a bright, razor-sharp smile. "You promised to handle our dinners," my father barked, his voice rising in panic as he realized I wasn't backing down. "You're my daughter. You owe me for everything I've done for you." "I paid off your $60,000 gambling debt 3 years ago, Dad," I said, ensuring my tone remained loud enough for the neighboring tables to catch every word. "I paid for Evelyn's college tuition, and I've covered every single family mortgage payment, grocery run, and extravagant dinner since my mother passed. I have paid my debt to this family 10 times over. Today, the Bank of Julianne is permanently closed." I took Leo's small hand in mine. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't frightened. He saw the unshakable strength in my posture. "Enjoy your dinner, everyone," I said softly. Without waiting for another word, I walked out of L'Auberge's door, leaving my father scrambling to find credit cards that wouldn't decline, while Evelyn frantically tried to explain to the waiter why they couldn't cover the bill. When Leo and I stepped out into the cool evening rain, I leaned down, looked into his eyes, and said, "How about we go get the biggest, best gourmet burgers in the city? Just the 2 of us." For the first time all evening, Leo gave me a brilliant, radiant smile. "Yes, Mom." We went to a cozy, quiet diner 3 blocks away, where Leo ate his favorite meal in peace, undisturbed by cruelty or judgment. But if my family thought that walking out on a $1,200 steak dinner was the extent of my revenge, they severely underestimated how thoroughly I had documented their leeching over the years. That night was merely the spark. The real fire was about to burn their comfortable, parasitic lives to the ground. You see, for the past 4 years, I hadn't just been paying their bills out of naivety. I was an accountant, and a damn good one. Every single time my father asked for a loan to keep his house out of foreclosure, every time Evelyn needed cash for a car payment, I had them sign formal, legally binding promissory notes, secured against the only valuable asset the family still owned, the family estate and father's business holdings. They had signed the papers casually over the years, barely reading the fine print, assuming their quiet, dutiful Julianne would never actually enforce a legal contract against her own blood. They thought those documents were just formal formalities to appease my obsessive nature. They were wrong. The very next morning at 8:00 a.m., my phone began ringing off the hook. I let it ring. First came 10 missed calls from my father, followed by frantic text messages. "Julianne, you ruined Evelyn's night. The restaurant almost called the police." I had to put the bill on my emergency card and it maxed out. "Call me back immediately." Then came Evelyn's texts, alternating between bitter insults and desperate pleas. "You humiliated me in front of my kids. You're a selfish monster. We need $5,000 for the kids' private school tuition by Friday or they're getting expelled. Send it now." I didn't reply to a single text. Instead, I poured myself a hot cup of coffee, sat down at my glass desk in my sunlit home office, and opened a crisp, heavy manila folder. Inside were the defaulted loan agreements, complete with notarized signatures and accrued interest calculations. Total amount owed to me, $342,000. I picked up my phone, dialed my corporate attorney, and placed it on speaker. "Morning, Julianne," my lawyer said. "Are we finally doing it?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, looking at a framed photo of Leo laughing on a beach. "Initiate the foreclosure proceedings on the estate," I said calmly, "and file the petition to seize my father's commercial equity. Give them 30 days' notice to vacate." 30 days went by faster than a blink, and with every passing week, my family's panic mutated from outrage into pure, unadulterated terror. They tried everything to break me. First came the flying sequence of distant relatives calling to lecture me about family values and filial piety. I blocked every single one of them. Then came my father knocking on my front door late at night, pounding until the wood shook, shouting that I was an ungrateful daughter who was ruining his life. I didn't open the door. I simply called the police and had him served with a formal trespass warning right on my porch. When the final eviction notice arrived, stamped by the county sheriff, reality hit them like a freight train. My father's commercial property, a small strip mall complex he had inherited and used as his primary income stream, was officially seized to settle his debt to me. Meanwhile, the legal ownership of the family home transferred completely into my name. On the day of the eviction, I drove down to the house I had grown up in. The afternoon sky was gray and overcast, reflecting the grim atmosphere in the driveway. A moving truck was parked on the curb, and movers were carrying out sofas, boxes, and televisions under the watchful eye of 2 local deputies. Evelyn was standing on the lawn, her clothes wrinkled, her hair tied back in a messy knot. The designer bags and arrogant air she had paraded at L'Auberge door were nowhere to be found. Beside her, her husband looked completely defeated, sitting on a rolled-up rug with his head in his hands. Their kids were arguing in the back of an old hatchback, their private school uniforms replaced by faded T-shirts after they were transferred to public school the previous week. My father sat on the front porch steps looking 20 years older. The bravado that had fueled him for decades had completely vanished, leaving behind a frail, bitter old man holding a single cardboard box of his personal belongings. As I stepped out of my car, dressed in a sharp, tailored coat, Evelyn spotted me. She charged across the lawn, her eyes wild with fury and desperation. "Are you happy now, Julianne?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Look at what you've done to us. You took my dad's house. You forced us into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. My kids had to switch schools. Is this what you wanted? To destroy your own family over a steak dinner?" I stopped a few feet away from her, keeping my hands resting comfortably in my coat pockets. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. "This was never about a steak dinner, Evelyn," I said, my voice ice cold and steady. "The steak dinner was just the moment I realized you truly believed Leo and I were subhuman. It was the moment I realized I was paying hundreds of thousands of dollars just to be tortured by people who shared my blood. We're your family." She sobbed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "You're supposed to forgive family. Family doesn't hand an 8-year-old child a piece of stale bread while stuffing their own faces with $100 steaks. I replied directly. Family doesn't treat loyalty like an infinite bank account. You didn't love me, Evelyn. You loved my money. And Dad didn't love a daughter, he loved a safety net. My father slowly stood up from the porch steps, clutching his cardboard box. He walked down the stone path, his shoulders hunched. He stopped near Evelyn and looked at me, his lip trembling. Julianne, he rasped, his voice devoid of the booming authority he used to command. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? You're going to live in the small one-bedroom rental apartment I secured for you, Dad, I said, stepping closer. I paid the first 3 months of rent. After that, your monthly Social Security check will cover it if you live frugally. I didn't leave you on the street, because unlike you, I actually have a soul. But you will never step foot on my property again, and you will never receive another dime of my hard-earned money. You took everything, he whispered. No, I corrected him calmly. I simply took back what was mine. I funded your life for 7 years, and you repaid me with contempt. Now you get to live the life you can actually afford. I turned my back on them, walking back toward my car without looking back. As I opened the driver's door, I heard Evelyn crying hysterically on the lawn, and my father calling out my name one last time. But the sound was drowned out by the quiet purr of my engine. 3 months later, the family estate was completely renovated. I didn't sell it. Instead, I converted the property into a bright, fully funded sensory learning center for autistic children and low-income families. A place where every child is welcomed, valued, and nourished, completely free of charge. Every morning, when I drop Leo off at his new school and see the brass plaque on the front gate reading the Leo Foundation, I am reminded of that rainy night at the steakhouse. It took years of pain to realize my worth, but the moment I stood up at that table, I didn't just walk away from a $1,200 bill. I bought my freedom. What do you think about how everything unfolded? Would you have given them that second chance, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.